The Pittsburgh Penguins are now negotiating a new deal with captain Sidney Crosby, but when will it get done and how much will he make? Hunter Hodies of Locked On Penguins is here to talk about that and all things Penguins next on the Locked On NHL Podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show a familiar face and voice to Locked On NHL listeners and viewers, Hunter Hodies of Locked On Penguins. And Hunter, the big news out of Pittsburgh now, negotiations going on between the Penguins and Sidney Crosby. Now, he still has, 1 year left on his contract, but what are we talking about with negotiations here? And, I mean, is this going to be more of a team-friendly deal, or is Sid still looking for a lot of money?
I mean, it could be a bit of both. I mean, Sid has taken below market value throughout his entire career, especially throughout this entire deal. If you remember, he signed this mega deal before the latest CBA. So it had like a bunch of different stuff in it that you wouldn't be allowed to have right now. I mean, it was a 12-year contract. You can't sign players to a 12-year contracts anymore, but he's been making $8.7 million per year. That's the AAV on the contract throughout this deal. But I think for this one, you're going to be looking at, if I had to guess, a 3-year contract somewhere, $8 to $10 million per year. If he wants to ask more, I can't blame him. He's taken, again, $8.7 million per season for the last 12 years. And also, he deserves to make more money. So I really don't think this is going to be that hard of a negotiation between the Penguins and Sid and his agent, Pat Brisson. This should be very straightforward. I just hope that it stays pretty quiet, because if you remember a couple years ago with the contract talks with Evgeny Malkin, those went pretty public at the closer you got to free agency, and that's when Gino and his agent got really mad at how the Penguins and Ron Hextall were approaching the contract talks, and then literally right before free agency started, they agreed to a big contract. So I hope it's just a little bit more quiet, but if I also had to guess, this is going to get announced on July 1. I really don't think they're going to let this linger too much into the offseason. I think they're going to get this done pretty quickly here, and I think you're going to look at a contract 3 years, $8 to $10 million per season, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he just re-upped for $8.7 million per year just because of how superstitious he is overall. But I think it's going to be a 3-year extension for him.
And do you think this is his last contract with the Penguins, or maybe there's another 1 or 2 year deal after this?
I think this is his last quote unquote big contract with the Penguins. I think after this, he'll be obviously a bit older. He's going to turn 37 this year, so he'll be over 40 by the time that one is up. So I think at that point you're looking at, if he wants to keep playing, a 1-year deal, and then maybe if he wants to keep playing after that, another 1-year deal. But he's not going to end his career with any other team, I don't think.
And how important do you think it is for the Penguins to get this deal done at or close to July 1st?
I wouldn't say it's like the most important thing in the world just because they have big needs to fill for this offseason, but you still want it squared away. I don't really want to head into this next season with Crosby and the whole talk being like, oh, this is last year of his contract. What are the discussions going to look like? Oh, could he be somehow dealt at the trade deadline, which is not going to happen, even though we'll have to see if the Penguins make the playoffs next year. But I don't want any of that talk during the season. It's important. It's not the most important thing, but I still would rather get it done sooner rather than later. And I do think it is going to get done pretty quickly. I don't think there's going to be a bad blood on either side here. There's no reason for there to be bad blood.
You talked about the important moves this team needs to make, some decisions on players who are currently on the roster. Who do you think is most likely not to be back in a Pittsburgh Penguins sweater next season?
Well, you had Jeff Carter announce his retirement. He had a great career overall. Other than that, I mean, they don't have too many big UFAs this offseason. I mean, Jansen Harkins, who's on the main roster, I don't think he's going to come back. Goaltender Alex Nedeljkovic. Now, the door I don't think has been fully shut on him coming back, but I would kind of be surprised at this point if he did. He's going to be looking for a contract, I think at least in the 2 to 2.5 million per year range, and they already have Jari signed for 5 more years at 5.375 million per year. If you add 2 to 2.5 million to that, you're getting close to 8 million for 2 goalies. I'm not really too interested in that heading into next season, so I don't think he's coming back. Players that are currently on the roster, I would be a bit surprised if Riley Smith is on this team next year. He just didn't seem like a good fit for the Penguins throughout the season. He had a nice first month, but he really tailed off after that. I could see a few teams out there looking at him as maybe a bounce back candidate on their respective teams. So I think the Penguins are going to do everything in their power to try and clear that contract out and get an extra 5 million salary cap space. Right now, because of the salary cap going to be 88 million, you're looking at them having a little over 13 million in cap space. Before, it was looking like it was going to be a little under 13 million, but because they get the extra 300K, it's going to be about 13.2 million. So if you can clear 5 million there, you get over 18, which is close to what they had last year. They had about 20 million. You just got to, I keep saying on the show, you have to use it wisely and not just throw out a bunch of money at players who really aren't going to be that good of fits on the team. But, outside of Riley Smith, there's an outside shot that they can maybe trade Raquel, looking at his contract, looking at the production he had this year. And then obviously, I think they're going to listen on Tristan Jarry, but unless they can find a taker, or unless they can also find an upgrade over him, I think it's 70-30 that he does come back to the Penguins. So those are a couple players that I could see them at least looking to move or listening throughout the offseason here.
Now, we know this team has missed the playoffs the last 2 years, and we also know, as far as negotiations with Sidney Crosby, they want to give Crosby, Malkin, Letang, etc., one more shot at the cup. So it's going to be more of a win now mode. What is this team looking to add this offseason to get them back into playoff contention?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're trying to, win now for this year while also looking to the future a little bit. Dubas has said he kind of wants to do a retool on the fly thing, maybe trying to stockpile some more picks, which is why I could see them moving, more than one veteran off this team during the offseason. But in terms of needs for this offseason, I think they very much need a third line center. I think that's their biggest need right now. I like how Lars Eller played this past year, had 16 goals, but I think when you look at his age, I don't know if he's going to repeat that next year. And I think he serves this team better as a fourth line center. If you can get a third line center that can come in, produce, 17, 20 goals, be a bit more of a playmaker, even a bit better defensively, I would be very much in favor of that. I think they could also use another middle six winger that can play up and down the lineup to give them a little bit more depth scoring. Those I think are the two biggest needs for this team. And then if you have the money for it, potentially another top 4 defenseman. I look at the left side specifically. Marcus Pettersson's great. He has another year left on his contract. I think they're going to talk extension with him this offseason as well. And that's obviously going to be a high ticket, but it's still someone that I would sign back for multiple years. But after that, you have questions about P.O. Joseph. He's a restricted free agent. I think he's going to come back, but you never know. And then you have Ryan Graves. Kyle Dubas, he didn't say he sucked during his press conference, but he basically did, again, without fully saying that word. He knows he needs to be better, a lot better for this upcoming season. I think they're going to give him another shot, but I still think when I look at that left side, it's vulnerable. And if you can get another top 4 defenseman to play on that left side, maybe by opening up some more cap space, I think that would also really help this team heading into next season as well. So those are the 3 big needs I have for this team heading into next season. And if you can somehow potentially upgrade over Jari at starting goaltender, I would look at that as well, even though I think that one's a little more unlikely at this time.
If Jari stays and Nedeljkovic goes, what kind of goalie are they looking to add to back up Jari?
So I think they could do something similar to what they did when they signed Nedeljkovic, looking at maybe some cheap options during free agency, even though the goalie market is not that good. They'll maybe try to go out, at least get a 1B cheap option. But if they don't like that, they do have Joel Blomqvist down in Wilkes-Barre. There's talk that he might be NHL ready. He had a really great year in Wilkes-Barre this year. He hasn't played an NHL game yet, but they're going to, at least if they don't make a move in free agency to get a backup, if Nedeljkovic walks, they're going to give Blomqvist every opportunity to win that backup job in camp. So it's either going to be him or just someone similar to Nedeljkovic that signed for really cheap last offseason.
All right, Hunter, it should be interesting. I know you'll have it covered every step of the way. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, you can get Locked On Penguins wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, SiriusXM, etc. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodies. I host the show with Patrick Damp, my co-host. You can follow him on Twitter at Synonym for Wet. And we'll have another episode for you all on Monday.
All right. Thanks so much, Hunter.
Yeah, thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more. You could bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you could use to bet everything from the NBA Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. And hockey fans, you could use your knowledge of the NHL on FanDuel. You could bet on who's going to win tonight's Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Final, who's going to win the series, or maybe even who's going to win the Conn Smythe Trophy as the playoff MVP. You can get all the latest odds on that and more at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.